All right, it is Thursday, October 12th, right? October 12th, 2023. Hey guys, you're watching the MMA Ecosystem Live podcast. I'm your host as usual, Chris Presnell, owner of MMA Ecosystem. This is your first time on my channel or watching this podcast. I report on Asian MMA news. I've worked for a lot of different publications, worked as an MMA manager, currently work both for myself here at MMA Ecosystem, and also work for Tapology as well. Longtime MMA fan, much longer, coming up on 20 years. It's a long time to do anything. But yeah, glad you guys could make it. There's a lot going on, even literally as we speak. I have been checking my phone every couple times every minute, looking at the updates from this UFC USADA press conference and everything that's going down there. So if anything happens while I'm on the air, let me know, because obviously I can't check things. But so entertaining, such an entertaining week. You would have never thought that in a week that we lost both the main event and co-main event of the next UFC pay-per-view, that this would overall be such like a gratifying week. Both of the replacement fights for the main and co-main of UFC 294, you may have mixed reactions to it, but they're at least interesting fights, to say the least. At the very least, they're interesting fights. So I've got my own opinions as well, whether or not they're like fights that I'm super excited. I've got my own reaction to them, but they're at least interesting fights. So there's that. We had the news of USADA that is still unfolding, yet to see everything that's going to come out of this crazy situation with USADA going away from the UFC. What else? UFC Saudi Arabia announced. So much interesting stuff. Fortunately for me, I have an outlet like this to be able to talk about it, because, as I go throughout my day, there aren't very many people that walk up to me and say, Chris, what are your opinions on UFC Riyadh? If you could change the UFC drug testing policy, what would you do to change that? So yeah, happy to have this kind of platform where we can talk about those kind of things. But that's not necessarily the focus of the show. Perhaps why you're here on this podcast is to hear me talk about Asian MMA, which I will definitely do that. There's a short schedule for the weekend. Next weekend is much crazier in terms of the Asian MMA schedule. But there are a few things going down this weekend, and I will run through those. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, I really appreciate that. Just takes half a second to do, but otherwise, yeah. Let's get on with the show. So I was going to talk about One Friday fights, but I don't even know what the card is. I literally checked everywhere I knew where to check before the show started, and I could not find the fight card listed anywhere besides the top couple fights. So I saw every week they post it on the One Thailand page, Instagram page. But of course, all the names are written in Thai, which of all the languages I do know how to read, Thai, unfortunately, is not one of them. And it looks like they may have even taken down that graphic as well. Perhaps the fight card has changed. So I've got no idea what that card is. I saw that there's a Filipino guy perhaps fighting on the card. So that's great. One championship, really. I mean, most of like the really good Filipino fighters have traditionally fought with one. It seems like that's a tradition that's continuing. So they've just got a lot of the connections, all the relationships there. So good for them. Otherwise, yeah, I'll probably just be posting those results tomorrow morning when the fights go down. But aside from that, we've got JCK going down this Saturday. So originally there was a new branding of an event called JCK Kings. The first event of that series was supposed to go down this Saturday from their headquarters. I think distinguishing difference is that there would be a title fight at the top. So as far as I can tell, JCK is transitioning from the seasonal kind of PFL style. This is the 2023 winner, the 2022 winners, to more of a traditional champion defending their belt rankings sort of system, which I think is appropriate considering. I feel like for a market as big as China, they need at least one organization that has that kind of stability, and it's just so much less of a headache. I think that was the thing, was it was such a headache to try and maintain these really complex. It wasn't just a simple tournament. There was like 2 pools where it was like, this tournament is feeding into the veterans that are fighting in a round robin system, and at the end they kind of feed together. And it was so complicated to maintain that every year, and things would get delayed and pushed back, and this guy would be injured, and so then they've got to put that fight later in the year, and it's very, very complicated for fans to follow. I tried my best to follow it. I didn't always understand what was happening, but I'm happy that they're simplifying things. It's a much, much better way to build stars as well. Fighters that are holding a belt, defending the belt. Rankings actually mean something as well. So happy they're doing that. The event this Saturday was supposed to be headlined by the bantamweight champion Wang Xiaoxiang, defending his belt in a rematch of a fight that went down earlier this year against Mongolian Chinese fighter Du Lila. That was supposed to happen. Wang had to pull out last week because of injury. So now the co-main event is Wang Qi, who traditionally has fought at welterweight and gotten pretty far in JCK tournaments. He's dropping down to lightweight and fighting Husalatu, who is a kind of longtime JCK lightweight as well. Otherwise, on the card, you've got one of their tournaments, their typical tournaments that they run. The last couple months, they'll have a one-night 4-man tournament, and this time they're doing the flyweights. I believe that's the last of the weight classes for them to do. The guy that should steal the show and easily win this whole thing is Li Zongwu, who is a 6-0 flyweight of the E ethnic minority, trains the UFC, PI, and comes from Umbo Fight. He should steal the show. He's honestly way overqualified for this competition, for the kind of competition that they're putting up against in this 4-man tournament. So that should be able to get him 2 more wins that night. Otherwise, not a whole lot to report from this event. There is a women's strawweight fight between Liu Xiaoni and Liu Jie. Liu Xiaoni 14-7, strawweight, fighting Liu Jie, who is 5-2. So glad to see JCK putting more women's fights on events. There's usually 1 per event. That is great to see that. Other than that, really not a whole lot going on this weekend besides the One Friday Fight show. I know tomorrow there is a show in Guam called Brawl International. They're having their 3rd show, and a lot of times there's Asian fighters that will be on that card. Like it's where Shin Haraguchi fought his last fight, or maybe his second to last fight before Road to UFC. Every once in a while, they have some pretty good Asian prospects on there. So this one, there's a couple of Japanese guys on it. I'm not sure if that fight card is on Tapology, but and then let's see, Korean guy Lee Hae-won versus Sunichi Shunizu for a bantamweight title. Otherwise, you can check out their social media for the rest of that card. Glory of Heroes. I think this is the first time I've mentioned them. They're a longtime Chinese promotion, but they've kind of waffled back and forth between MMA and kickboxing. And then they have been in just kickboxing for a while with a couple MMA fights sprinkled here and there. Anyways, they actually have a couple more MMA fights on their event this weekend. So I think that's tomorrow, the 13th. So I'm still getting some info on that. I have added a couple of those fights to their Tapology page. Nothing big, but was interested to see it. They put quite a few more MMA fights on that event. Other than that, we've got UFC Vegas 81. Alatengheili against Chris Gutierrez is our lone fight featuring Asian fighters this weekend. Overall, a pretty solid card. as far as Apex cards are concerned. You've got Alateng on there, Emily Ducote against Ashley Yoder. That's a good fight. Irina Alexeva of Russia. She had a cool debut. Terrence McKinney is always fun. Darren Elkins is a great addition to any card now. Cameron Simon versus Christian Rodriguez. Really, really interesting bantamweight prospects fight. Michelle Pajeda is on the fight against Andre Petrosky. That could be explosive. Adrian Yanez against Jonathan Martinez, ranked bantamweight fight. Jennifer Maya against Viviana Araujo at flyweight, and then the main event, Sadiq Yusuf against Edson Barboza. Really a lot to love on that fight card. I'll try to catch as much of it as I can, but Alatengheili fighting Chris Gutierrez. Both Gutierrez and Alatengheili lost their opponents a couple weeks ago on, I believe, different cards in October. So now they're fighting each other at bantamweight. Originally, Alatengheili was supposed to fight, blanking on who he was supposed to fight, but a guy much lower than Chris Gutierrez. He really got a tough switcheroo fighting Gutierrez on short notice because Gutierrez, ranked guy, ranked at, I believe, 15. Really good fighter, pretty complete fighter, good wrestling. Striking has come along a long ways too. So, yeah, I'll be honest, tough fight for Alatengheili. He's got really, Alatengheili has really heavy hands. His wrestling's pretty good as well, but I think that Gutierrez is just a little bit better in everything. So I think he'll probably win this fight, but Alatengheili could definitely pull an upset if he's able to get the knockout. So yeah, looking forward to that, although kind of wish that Alateng would have been able to fight maybe a time or two more before fighting a ranked fighter. Even though that gamble could pay off, right? If he manages to beat Chris Gutierrez. Yeah, sorry, I wasn't really able to look deeply at that fight to give you like a real intelligent breakdown of it. But glad that Alatengheili is getting a chance to roll the dice and potentially beat a ranked guy. That's kind of cool. So other than that, we really just have, I know it's next Tuesday, but UAE Warriors 45, they always put on really, really interesting cards. I really, really enjoy watching UAE Warriors. A lot of good prospects coming up. The one that steals the show for me is Wang Zong against Amina Hadaya of Australia. Really love that Wang is getting to go to Abu Dhabi to fight. This is just her third pro MMA fight, so this is a really couldn't have been matched up better against a 3-1 opponent. And Hadaya has also trained with a lot of really good fighters. I saw a pic circulating of her with Alexander Volkanovski. So she is a pretty good fighter in her own right. Definitely no pushover. She trains at a freestyle fighting gym. Guessing that is in Australia. And she has also fought already for UAE Warriors. She won a split decision over Mona Fatui at UAE Warriors 41 back in May. So not her first run with UAE Warriors, also fought for Hex Fight Series, longer amateur career. So this is a really good test for someone who is 3-1 in her, for Wang Zong, who is way better than her 2-0 record would suggest. But love the development there. You've also got Sanjar Adilov out of Kazakhstan fighting on the card against Yamato Fujita. I think Adilov is a pretty good prospect as well. He's fought internationally quite a bit, so I'll have my eye on that. The other prospect to watch in this event is Hikaru Yoshino from Japan. At one point, he was one of the bigger Japanese prospects out there coming up the ranks, and then he fought his last fight was in UAE Warriors, and I think he got knocked out in that fight. Yeah, knocked out by Vinicius Oliveira, who we now know is a very good fighter. Vinicius Oliveira was one of the most impressive performances on Contender Series. Yeah, one of the more impressive performances on the Contender Series. So now we know that loss to Oliveira has aged really well for Hikaru Yoshino, and see if he can get back in the win column. He's already got wins over guys like Shohei Nosei. He's got Daisuke Endo, really experienced guy, Jamal Rustem at UAE Warriors. So Hikaru Yoshino could definitely get back on the horse in this fight. Fighting 7-0 Renat Kovalev of Russia. So there you go. UAE Warriors will have some good action for you next Tuesday morning. That's really all I got on the event side. On the just announcement side, and none of this is MMA ecosystem exclusive news, but y'all might have seen Yusu Young is fighting Kim Min Woo at Black Combat in January. That was announced on, I believe, just the latest Black Combat video. But that is a really, really big fight for Korean MMA. Two of Korea's best prospects. The winner, it is a #1 contender fight, which is a little bit interesting because Yusu Young, this is at featherweight. He used to be the featherweight champion. He went down to bantamweight, vacated the belt, and then now this is a #1 contender fight. So I feel like this might even be the biggest fight that Black Combat could put together at this moment, and it's not even for a belt. But that's a huge fight. Really looking forward to that. We don't have an exact date on that from the promotion, but I saw that, and then I need to confirm this. I may just message him after this, but I saw that Hwang Ye-le potentially has a fight in WLF on October 27th. Need to figure out who this guy is. Brazilian guy who's like a UFC veteran. I didn't recognize him. Last name Viana. Okay. Actually, I can look up who this guy is right now because the event he fought at in the UFC is on this graphic that I received. Hwang Ye-le, you may notice if you look at his record that he went from 13-0 to 9-0. The reason for that is because I got word that the first 4 fights of his career with Monster PWC, a Chengdu promotion, that all the fights in that promotion are amateur fights. So those first 4 fights, and I talked with Hwang Ye-le on that, and he actually said, yeah, those should be amateur. So that, and I think 1 or 2 of Tailaka Nuraji's fights got moved to amateur as well because he had a couple with that promotion. Okay, so Hwang Ye-le 9-0. He's going to be fighting UFC veteran Reginaldo Vieira. At least that's what this post that I'm seeing is. I haven't seen that posted anywhere else. I may just message Hwang after this and see if that's true. But that is with WLF, their 69th MMA event on October 27th. So there's another little tidbit for you. All right. Surely there's nothing you guys have to ask me about this week. Speaking of that, yeah, what do you think about the whole drama and their new partner, Drug-Free Sport? I don't know anything about Drug-Free Sport yet to be able to give you an opinion on them. I did see that they do drug testing for a lot of major sports leagues, like I'm like, I want to be able to quote this accurately. So the UFC has hired George Pirro, the FBI agent who is in charge of Saddam Hussein's interrogation, to be the administrator of the new UFC anti-drug program, which is interesting, right? Like, very high credentials, but is he credentialed has he ever done anything with like health and drug testing? That's one question I have. So I just cannot wait to watch this video. Anyways, sorry, I'm sure you all can look it up. The different sports leagues that what are they? DFSI, yeah, Drug Free Sport International. The different leagues that they run. But what I would need to know to have an opinion is what's their process of drug testing? How often do they drug test? What are athletes required to submit their location? And just what kind of reputation they have before I really have an opinion on them. So, and I think I would want to know what were the key distinctives of DFSI for the UFC that were appealing to them to switch from USADA to DFSI. But yeah, overall, I am no fan of USADA whatsoever. I mean, I think I'm with a lot of folks that agree that like they way overstepped their bounds. They based a lot of their findings not on science. A lot of the conversation is built into the war on drugs. Yeah, I'm as happy as everyone to see USADA go. I never felt like they represented the fighters very well at all, or like treated them with a whole lot of respect. So yeah, I'm happy to see them go away. I still like, we're still at the very beginning of all this. Like what like UFC demanded that USADA issue an apology and a retraction by 5 o'clock today, which that would be Pacific time. So in the next 30 minutes, which you know that's not going to happen. That's going to trigger a lawsuit most likely. So we're just at the beginning of this, and there's a lot of things that have not been uncovered just yet or disclosed about everything that happened with the whole Conor McGregor situation. Yeah, we've heard from like figureheads on both sides, but I'd also like to hear some reporting from journalists as well that are able to verify things, view documents, communications, all that. So that's why, in some ways, I'm still reserving an opinion on it. If you have any other follow-up questions, I'd be happy to answer it. There's so much that I do have opinions on. I don't have opinions on everything, but yeah, happy to see them go. The fighters wanted drug testing. I think a lot of them wanted it, but like the degree and the overreach that USADA, I think, that USADA exercise made them extremely unpopular. And yeah, I mean, I think if you just want an emblem, if you want a single emblem of the legacy of USADA, it all goes back to how they handled John Jones' situation. And like Josh Barnett and Tom Lawler, but the John Jones situation was a disaster, and it robbed us of the main event of the biggest fight card we had ever seen the week of the fight. And it turned out that it was based on pseudoscience, hunches, and things flip-flopping back and forth. And really, I don't know, that was USADA. That's what I think of when I think of USADA, is I think of the John Jones situation and fallout. And I don't think he's ever going to get that fight switched back to a win. I feel as though that should have happened a long time ago with all the uncertainty around that. And there was nothing questionable about the way that the fight unfolded. But yeah, that was a disaster, and you USADA really screwed over John Jones big time in that situation, in my opinion. Yeah, Jimmy, you sent me an email about, appreciated that email. So for those watching, he's asking about, okay, so he had sent me an opinion. So this is regarding Weili versus Suarez. A fight that there's currently no rumor, at least right now, of this happening. But asking about Weili versus Suarez, having a wrestling-based attack against Lemos versus a wrestling attack versus Suarez. And quoting another person in the Twitter space, basically saying that, like, Weili had this wrestling heavy attack against Lemos, and that's not going to work against Suarez. Well, of course not. That would be about the last thing that Weili would ever attempt to wrestle with Suarez. Weili would try to defend the shot and strike. So it's kind of, I think that's a little bit of a weird take to base. First of all, Lemos has a Muay Thai background, so whereas Suarez does not. And Weili has a striking background, some wrestling as well, whereas Suarez does not. So the game plan is obviously drastically different. Weili used a striking strategy against Joanna and was able to beat her. Against Carla Esparza, she chose a grappling strategy, but the grappling of Esparza and Suarez are very different. I would put pretty much all my chips believing that Suarez, Weili would not choose a grappling strategy at all. So I feel like that's pretty like easy answer for me. Yeah, I may email you a little bit more on that, Jimmy, but that's my thoughts on the situation. It looks like the next two questions are about UFC Riyadh. What are your thoughts, and what do you think about the UFC Saudi Arabia is going to be a fight night? Why not make that a pay-per-view like Abu Dhabi? First of all, I would say pay-per-view is a no because of the timing. I would say the timing of it all is one reason. Think okay, March 2nd is wedged right in there between like UFC 288, 299, 300. They could have made the Riyadh show a pay-per-view like UFC 299 and tried to load up a lot of international fighters on there. I guess that's one point that you could make, so that they could put more of like the McGregors and the I don't know who would be McGregor, Adesanya. If they're gonna bring back someone like Brock Lesnar or Ronda Rousey, throw them on the 300 card. Right, they do this in June a lot of times, or they'll have an international pay-per-view before their international fight week. So in one way, I could see how that could work out. What I am wondering is, first of all, there could be a lot of competition for big names in that time period, and also just since it's their first event too in Riyadh and Saudi Arabia, I don't know what the difference is. I mean, there's no difference in quality per se, but for a pay-per-view, I'm wondering if this event is actually going to be pretty small in terms of audience, because currently there is no like basketball arena in Riyadh. At least that's the size and scale that the UFC is used to hosting events in. I looked at all the sporting arenas in Saudi Arabia, especially for indoor arenas, And the biggest arena in Riyadh right now is 5,000 seats, and it's a pretty old arena, which means either one of three options. Either the UFC is going to hold a really small show, kind of like think of like a Pearl of the Palms kind of feel, or what was the other one they did this year in Las Vegas, the live show. Forgetting the name of that arena that they did in March with Dvalishvili and Peter Yan, but kind of more of that kind of feel to it if they go to this 5,000 seat arena, or they host a pretty big fight card in a soccer arena and just try to cover it. Someone asked me about temperature, kind of looking at like the Abu Dhabi event that was in 2010. And of course that was a pay-per-view. But they had to build this arena just for the UFC, this outdoor arena. It was really hot. That was in April. That was on April 10th. This is March 2nd, and I looked at a lot of things for this because I was really curious. But the average high temperature in Riyadh at that time will be like 80 degrees Fahrenheit during the daytime. So not too bad. Still could be a little bit warm, but really not too bad. So they could have an open air event. The other would be to simply create some kind of short-term arena or long-term and try to build it before then. But usually I'm guessing they're not going to try to do that unless it's an outdoor event, simply because if the UFC is going to host in an indoor arena, a new one especially, they prefer for that arena to have a little bit of a track record of hosting big marquee events. So, and I was listening to Lawrence Epstein, who's the UFC chief operations officer, talking about that last year, as he was talking about kind of what they consider in going to different places. So my guess is that they're just going to hold either small show, or they're going to do a soccer stadium or football stadium and just try and cover it and make do there. But yeah, not a lot of options in terms of venues. Even like I was looking at where maybe I missed it. I could have totally missed it, but apparently the Fury Ngannou fight, I think that's supposed to go down in Riyadh, right? And I didn't see a venue announced for that. Maybe I totally missed that. See if there's anything been announced on that yet. Going down in Riyadh, I don't see a venue announced just yet. We're going to try and sell tickets to this. Interesting. Yeah, I do not see that. So what's interesting is that Riyadh is not that far from Gaza, which is one of the last places that you may want to, I don't know, you all see in the news this week, a lot of very intense things going on there. And it's like I wasn't surprised that the UFC eventually was going to do an event in Saudi Arabia. I was a little surprised just because I kind of thought that their partner in the Middle East was Abu Dhabi, and everything just works out so wonderfully there. But it had to have been a situation where Saudi Arabia was throwing a massive amount of money at the UFC to come host an event. So not really sure what all the politics behind that are. Obviously, I don't love it. I don't, Saudi Arabia, really bad human rights record, well documented, not a matter of opinion. There was everything that went down with Jamal Khashoggi killing a journalist, overall really bad and violent treatment of journalists. The war in Yemen, a pretty dark spot. A lot of reasons that to not be in business with Saudi Arabia, but it's the money, and the UFC keeps politics out of it until it's they keep politics out of the sport until it's advantageous for them, and then they welcome politics in. So they're not going to get any negative consequences from this. There's already been other sporting events. There's the whole thing with the PGA Tour in Saudi Arabia as well. There are no negative consequences of this. Us as fans, we're not going to, and I mean, I haven't thought for like myself yet in terms of like, is this an event that I'm going to cover, watch, all of those things. But like, it's not like the viewership is going to be bad for this event, you know. So there are no negative consequences for holding an event in Saudi Arabia, and they're getting a lot of money, so they're going to do it. Yeah, don't love it. Kind of gross to me, but this is sports today. They don't care. So, yeah. My opinion on winner of Usman Chimaev getting the next title shot. Want your opinion so I can use it to brag to my friends who watch MMA. I am, at this point, I think I'm okay with it. Chimaev, totally okay with that. In a different circumstance, a guy coming into a new weight class, fighting a guy who is from also a different weight class, not from middleweight, fighting that guy, getting a title shot, I would feel a lot of this depends on the state of the division, right? So bantamweight, there's a line there. What else? Welterweight, there's a line there. Middleweight, it's a little bit more up in the air. I mean, you could make an argument for another Adesanya fight. It's not personally what I want right away, but otherwise, there's a lot of fighters that haven't fought Strickland, sure, but at the same time, there is no clear contender. There's a lot of fighters that have already fought for the title, but there's not many fighters that are on long win streaks. And Chimaev is a guy that we've all been talking about for a long time. And at welterweight, he was like pretty much right there for a title shot, but the weight was an issue there. So is being highly ranked, like in the top 3 at one division, is that enough to basically just like jump over to the top 3 of another division? Maybe, I don't know. But if you're going to fight a fighter from outside the division to get a title shot, a longtime former champion like Kamaru Usman is the best kind of fighter that you can fight. Usman, he could give Chimaev a lot of problems. Will be interesting to see how these guys compare up in terms of size, right? 2 former welterweights. Chimaev has fought at middleweight before. In your mind, you think Chimaev probably going to be the bigger guy, but maybe not. I mean, Usman is a really broad. What I think of him is he's a really the shoulders, really, really broad shoulders. He's a great wrestler too, as well. So it's a very interesting fight. It's a very intriguing fight. And at this point, I'm not opposed to the winner of this fight getting a title shot. Usman is a little different just because he wasn't necessarily for him. I would not be opposed to him fighting one more time before getting a middleweight title shot. But it's once you grab the belt and once you hold on to the belt for a while, it pretty much, in a lot of ways, gives you the ability to move up or down in weight and get an immediate title shot. I mean, that's just kind of how it works. We saw it with Frankie Edgar, Max Holloway when he moved up and fought for the interim title. So I wouldn't be opposed to it. Kamaru Usman, one of the best in the world. Middleweight, kind of up in the air right now. No super clear contender. Cannonier is the closest we have, but even he's not on a long win streak. He has fought for the title, not against Strickland. So if Usman wins, it's kind of a coin flip. for me between Cannonier and Usman. Kind of depends on how things shake out. But like if Chimaev wins, I mean, come on. Imagine that fight at UFC 300. Strickland versus Chimaev at UFC 300. You throw Conor McGregor on there. Who knows if he'll actually show up, but like at least try to put that fight on there. Maybe if we can get John Jones on there if he doesn't retire, like, which is probably risky as well. But yeah, Chimaev versus Strickland. So much cringe going into that. That would just be like such a crazy fight. Such a crazy fight. Worthy of, at the very least, a co-main event at UFC 300. So would love that. Yeah, I'm here for it. If you're gonna, and hey, this is a replacement fight. So about as good as it gets in terms of a replacement. I think I'd rather Chimaev fight Usman than any of the alternatives. Like Chimaev versus Vettori, Chimaev versus Cannonier could have been interesting. That could have been a good fight, but for some reason, Usman just having this track record of being a longtime champion. They're both under the same management, and both have Ramzan Kadyrov connections. It's just some interesting storylines going into that fight for sure. For sure, yeah. How are you going to watch Hidayah versus Wang Tsong? How am I going to UFC? It's on UFC Fight Pass. Tsong is considered one of 3 queens of combat sports in China. Kahan and Wei Li are the other 2, while Hidayah is from Volkanovski's gym. Yeah, really pumped to see Wang Tsong fight a little bit better competition. Probably still needs like potentially 2 more fights after this. She needs to fight like maybe 1 more person, kind of like Hidayah, maybe 5 to 7 fights after this, and then put her up against like a real flyweight contender, or I guess bantamweight. Is this fight at flyweight or bantamweight? That's one question I need to see. Thought it was at flyweight, but man, if Wang Tsong fought at bantamweight, that'd be awesome. I thought that she was going to try and fight at flyweight. Depending on the timing of the fight when it was signed, that can affect what weight class it is at. So this fight will go down at flyweight. Okay. Man, you would just love to have more like top. We have so many flyweight prospects. Would love if we had more just awesome bantamweight prospects. But yeah, yeah, I don't know who can match Wang Tsong on the feet. Especially, I mean, Hidayah's got her hands full. That's for sure. Continuing on UFC coming to more Asian territories, friends told me that if UFC ever goes to Jakarta next year, it has to be after June is next year's election year. And first half of it is already slated to be the election process and all that. So UFC Jakarta could be second half instead of first half of the year. Yes, originally that was just kind of my best guess was June, but I think I heard more about it, I heard that September was actually the target for UFC going to Jakarta. And I think that just probably makes sense, like their schedule filling out this arena, the Indonesia arena, brand new, and let them have some more shows, work out some kinks if they have any. By then they'll have been operating for a year if the UFC visits in September. So I think that's probably better timing, to be honest. You think a fighter with a fighter being very good at combat sports brings the worst out of people? Oh yeah. Everyone can lose, and understanding that makes the sport enjoyable to discuss, since we can talk about cool matchups. See these things with Kamsa and even Tatiana Suarez, where people are just saying that they cannot lose. Makes them bad to talk to since they are boring, mean merchants. Do you agree or disagree? Yeah, I mean, if you think that a certain fighter can never lose, then you just haven't watched MMA for very long. And people may bring up Khabib as an example, but he retired at a very young age, is the thing. I mean, I guess anyone can never lose if they win 10 fights, if they go 10-0 and then decide to retire, right? I know Khabib was in the game much longer than that. Fought 29 times, good Lord, and never lost, but still retired right in the middle of his prime. And there were so many other matchups that we never got to see that could have been really interesting. And yeah, like would have loved to have seen like Khabib versus Michael Chandler. Could have been really interesting. If he went up in weight, Khabib versus Kamaru Usman could have been really interesting as well. But yeah, it's kind of hard to say, like, you never, I mean, everyone's lost. Literally every like good fighter except for Khabib has lost. So if you feel that way, it just means that you haven't been watching MMA very long. And when people get on like a war wagon for a fighter, you know, or saying it might be different to say there is no one out there currently at their current skill level that can beat this fighter. You could be right in that. You could be right there, but there's actually no way to know that. So you have to watch their career unfold. You have to see new challengers come, and you know, there's that stat about this massive losing percentage for fighters over the age of 35. It's not just an age thing, but the longer you fight under the bright lights, and the longer you fight in these long 5-round title fights, everyone has a target on your back, and they're able to have so much tape on your strategy and your game plan, and they're able to write the book on you. And so eventually, you know, fighters like Valentina Shevchenko, a couple years ago, you looked at the flyweight division for women, and there was no one in the flyweight division that you could look at and say, I think this person could beat Valentina Shevchenko. At that time, you might have been right, and you could have been someone that said she's never going to lose. But then prospects came up, and fighters got better, and eventually they figured out her game. And who knows? She may never hold a title again. She could have trouble putting together a win streak from here on out. So yeah, interesting question. Why do I think that Alatengheili, Arichilung, and that girl Dana go to a camp like Fight Ready? I think who was like the first to go there. It was between Arichilung and Alatengheili. It might have been Arichilung go there first, and then we had like Zhang Wei Li there a while ago as well. It could be, and we had a Korean Zombie as well. It might have just been it's like once you get one guy that's kind of from your circle there, and the coaches work with that fighter, they kind of learn their style, how to communicate with them. Then other Mongolian Chinese fighters, or for Dana, he's a Mongolian guy, he's not Chinese, but eventually they just kind of form a little pod there, and the coaches get really used to working with him. Eddie Cha also might, because of like his family connections, might just have more comfort working with Asian fighters. So that's what I wonder, is even just like, yeah, it's a good camp for Asian fighters to connect with the coaches. Could be one thing. And now that like those guys feel really comfortable there, they feel settled in that environment, that city, Scottsdale, right, or Phoenix. Now they just feel comfortable there, and it feels like a second home. So if I'm a Mongolian fighter or a Mongolian Chinese fighter, and I'm looking to train in the States, it's probably the first place I'm going to go look at. It's a great, I mean, they've got great, both credentialed, just really famous wrestling. Henry Cejudo there, and they've also got Eddie Cha, who's done really good things with striking too. So I feel like it's a pretty complete package and done a lot of great things for a lot of fighters. So so it's a good gym, and also I think connects well with Asian fighters is what I would say. Do I find random drug testing like USADA incredibly invasive? Was the timing of USADA very blatant since it's days after the judgment of Mark Hunt? Kind of a funny typo that you said, Mark Hunt, versus Lesnar suit. Is there a problem in putting PED testing together? Does it make it scary to cheat at lower levels? Does it put a class divide on who can use PEDs? And that was originally the argument with PEDs, is it, quote, levels the playing field because really wealthy fighters or athletes who can afford to like have these very finely crafted designer drugs can find these ways to cheat the system where fighters who don't make as much money cannot. And so the claim was that it levels the playing field. You had asked about, is it incredibly invasive? Yes, it is. You have to realize that the fighters had zero say in all of this. They never were consulted. They had no input on the design of how and when they would be tested. And there's so many, and they did not consent to have someone look over their shoulder while they pee into a cup or take a shower. They did not consent to people waking them up in the middle of the night, knocking on their door. They didn't consent to any of that. They consented to it by fighting in the UFC, but they didn't consent to any of that process that was basically instituted overnight. So it is invasive. Fighters over and over have expressed their frustration, and not only the inconvenience, but the disruptive nature of that style of testing. There's the whole story about how like USADA woke up Volkanovski the night before a title fight and he didn't sleep very well. Big problem, right? Like very big problem. So it is incredibly invasive. You asked, does it make it scary to cheat at lower levels? I think your question kind of connects to a much deeper rabbit hole of there's been widespread different opinions and unverified reports from different fighters that say things like 80% of UFC fighters are on steroids or performance enhancing drugs, and people know how to get around it, this and that. I don't know. Honestly, I don't have any evidence to say if that's true or not. At the lower level, yes, like I would be lying. I think I'd be dishonest if I said that, like, did USADA deter fighters from using performance enhancing drugs? Absolutely. But is USADA the only option for testing performance enhancing drugs? No, they're not. And I do not think that they're the best option for testing performance enhancing drugs because of all of the extra things that come along with it, of the way that USADA tests, the science that they use, everything. So yeah, I am definitely not against drug testing, and it's probably, and I think it is a good thing to have, but the conversation is not should we test for drugs, it's which drug should we test for, it's how should we test for those drugs, what science are we using to flag fighters for banned substances. Again, this goes back to the whole John Jones picogram conversation. Eventually, USADA raised the threshold for banned substances, and which would have basically like avoided the whole John Jones situation. They based that on faulty, flimsy science. But yeah, so I would say, like, for sure, USADA's process probably deterred fighters at the lower level from cheating, but that's not to say there are still ways, and this becomes a very, I think, interesting argument. What is the line between using supplements that aid in like simple like whey protein? Where is the line between performance enhancing drugs that are banned and supplements that help you to heal and help you to rebuild muscle quickly and all the other things? And then I think that's where the conversation gets really gray for me. And I'd love to talk to someone. Perhaps maybe one day I'll read one of these books that I hear recommended about that. But I think that's my question, is like, what's really the dividing line between that, and how do we define that, and why has USADA chosen what they have? So, okay, what's my opinion on the short notice nature of Volkanovski versus Makhachev? We discussed in the past with Weili the importance of preparation, not just for Weili, and game plans, how does that affect Volk, who relies on excellent game plans to produce phenomenal performances? In defense of Volkanovski fighting Makhachev on short notice, he has already fought Makhachev with a full training camp, so it's not a fresh matchup for him. He knows a lot about the game plan of Islam Makhachev, not only in his preparation for that first fight, and they did tape study, all of that. So that gives me a little bit more comfort about him taking a short notice fight. And my sense is that after that first fight, especially since it was so close, they probably went through the fight and found ways that he could have improved. And that, like, especially as there's been a possibility teased of a rematch, these kind of improvements have already been on Volkanovski's mind. That's the way fighters think, I lost that fight. How could I have done better? Let me talk about it with my coaches. So fortunately, because they have already fought and it was very recent, a lot of those conversations, a lot of that research has already been done. Now, that's not the same as having a full training camp. That's not the same as being fully healthy or making a full updated game plan for a rematch. True. So that's my defense of Volkanovski taking a short notice fight. However, I've heard some people say that Volkanovski fighting against Makhachev again and losing again, and potentially losing via stoppage, does absolutely nothing to hurt his legacy. I disagree. Because that still puts 2 losses on your record. And right now, a lot of people have Alexander Volkanovski as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. You can't tell me that he's going to keep that spot if he gets submitted or knocked out by Islam Makhachev. My feeling is Makhachev would move into that #1 spot if he were able to finish Volkanovski, which a lot of times in these rematches, maybe it's close the first time, they fight again, and then one fighter finds out how to get the stoppage. So, I disagree saying that does nothing to harm his legacy. It's still, and it also just gives other fighters that might fight Volkanovski, it gives them more ways to exploit weaknesses, and it puts Volkanovski on the shelf. Rather than him fighting in January against Topuria, which is probably not going to happen unless he takes no damage and is able to easily finish Makhachev, which I find kind of unlikely. But I feel like if Volkanovski stayed at featherweight and continued to just collect scalps and title defenses, and then create that rematch with Makhachev once some time has passed and the timing is right, not too much time, maybe like end of next year, do it again in Abu Dhabi. I think that would be a better timing for me personally. But Yeah, I do think that this fight could be a fight to determine who's the current #1 pound-for-pound fighter. Some people would say John Jones too. That's another argument. He's definitely in the top 3. But yeah, definitely top 3, John Jones, Makhachev, and Volkanovski. So for sure. Yeah, totally. No problem. Saudi Arabia deal, I don't know why, but feel like the TKO could play a role there. WWE, exactly. Some people have pointed that out as well, is this deal with Saudi Arabia came together right after they merged. So probably WWE or Vince McMahon had something to do with that. He had the connection and got him in the door. Could be for sure. I'm so interested. This is one of like the stories all of a sudden. I mean, everyone right now is talking about USADA and UFC 294, as they should, but UFC Riyadh, I think that there's a lot that we don't know about that, a lot that went on behind the scenes that I'm really curious about. Unfortunately, I don't feel like I have the journalistic connections to be able to answer some of those questions about how the deal was done. If this is intended to be a long-term deal, of course, everything with venue, if there was any pushback of having it in Saudi Arabia internally as a company. So yeah, really interested in how this unfolds. Do I know more of the rich fighters outsource film study nerds? Yeah. I'm hearing that more and more from you all, for sure, for tape study. Absolutely. Thoughts on Dana's self-imposed flag ban, then calling out the media like it was their idea. As I tried to understand that situation, so brief recap, UFC bans fighters from carrying flags and also like weirdly bans a couple fighters from sensitive countries politically, just meaning like in the news sensitive, like Afghanistan, Russia. They gray out their flags. Ramona Pasquale from Hong Kong grayed out her flag. That kind of, I think, came maybe a little bit before the flag ban. So they banned the flags. Don't really give a reason why, but we all kind of guess that they don't want to ignite some kind of political issue. I think, who is it? Were they saying it was a fighter that had a flag, I think, from an ethnic minority, perhaps, that was kind of controversial, walked in with that. I think I know who it was, but I don't want to be wrong about that, so I won't say. But yeah, so they banned the flags and then they unbanned them, and then Dana White is all like, if flags offend you, then that's your problem. We don't care about that stuff here. And everyone was saying that, Dana, you were the one that banned them in the first place. I think if I'm reading in between the lines here, it was not Dana White who originally, that was not his request that flags be banned. It was probably someone like Ari Emanuel or someone higher up in Endeavor that said, hey, we don't want to be a political liability, especially as we're going back in live arenas with tons of fans. We don't want to see a riot happen at a UFC event, which is a legitimate concern. I'm not totally sure if I still would not have banned flags, but my guess is that it was someone above Dana that made that decision. Because just based on Dana's response, it sounded like there were people that were offended by that, and he's not even like saying it was the media or fans that were offended by it, but it was someone within the company that made that decision. That's how I read that. I could be wrong, but that's how I felt. Yeah. I'd rather see UFC go to places like maybe Egypt and Morocco. I would too. Middle East, but also part of Africa, so UFC Africa could be held there. Yeah, and I don't know if it's like an either or thing. I think Morocco would be a really great place to hold a UFC event. Really good place to hold a UFC event. Egypt, I'm not as sure. I'd have to check in and see like what kind of sporting events have happened there and what their venue situation is like. And really like, I mean, there's a handful of Egyptian fighters, but when I think of Morocco is having a little bit stronger of a combat sports culture. And Saudi Arabia, it's so interesting because like there really aren't a whole lot of like high profile Saudi Arabian fighters. There's probably a good like combat sports present like fan base there, but I mean yeah, I think of like Badr Hari with Morocco, kind of like a lot of that real intense like kickboxing combat sports fan base there. But Saudi Arabia, it's all about the money, and there are a lot of people that live in Saudi Arabia as well. So, and with Saudi Arabia, you know, there's a lot of wealth in that country, so they can charge pretty strong fees for tickets to their events as well. That's also kind of something you have to think about of where the UFC holds events. Is they like to go, you know, think about like going to Singapore. Of all the Southeast Asian countries, they go to Singapore because it's one of the wealthiest Asian countries that they could go to, so they can charge a lot more for ticket prices. The amenities, the venue, generally going to be a lot more newer, updated, things like that. So, yeah, for sure. Do I consider Eddie Cha an underrated striking coach? Yeah, I would. Sure. Follow up my question from earlier. Do you think that it's what makes our conversations different from other shows, since we understand that everyone can lose, even our favorite fighter in Wei Li, but we talk about where fighters train, who's coaching them, how. Well, I love that you refer to this as our show. It is our show. This isn't my show. This is our show, right, guys? Yes, I agree. I feel like you can only have constructive, interesting conversation breaking down fights if you acknowledge that everyone can lose, including your favorite fighter. And we know, if you know, it's like Whaley has already lost twice in the UFC, so we know that she can lose. Was the second Rose fight, really close? Sure, still a loss, and we've seen Whaley lose by knockout as well. So, yeah, I mean, it's no secret that Whaley is the most well-liked fighter on this channel. But yeah, anybody could lose. As soon if you feel like your favorite fighter can't lose, then you really can't have any conversation about how a fight might play out. You really can't give a respected opinion on a prediction either, right? So, which takes away a lot of the interest before a fight happens, in my opinion. So yeah, this is the last question. I have to ask my obligatory favorite old school Japanese MMA fighter. Were you a fan of Minoru Suzuki? Ooh, that's a deep cut. I've heard that name, but I'm not it might be too deep of a cut for me. So to answer your question, shame to say no. Well, yeah, that's an old guy. Japanese fellow who fought at, what weight class did he fight at? Oh yeah, that is way too deep of a cut for me. Good grief, we've got some nerds on this show for sure. No, I'll look into it. So Suzuki last fought in MMA November of 2002. Yeah, at 12 years old, I was not thinking about MMA. Fought almost entirely for Pancrase. Oh yeah, I got to check this guy out. lots and lots of wins by submission. Finished his MMA career with a 29-19 record. Let's see, who did this guy fought? Dennis Kang. Oh, lost by back injury in that fight. That was one of his last fights. John Lober, I've heard that name. Semi Schultz got knocked out by a knee in that fight. Fun Indian guy, Jagjit Singh. Vernon Tiger White, Guy Mesger. Okay. Frank Shamrock, another Guy Mesger fight. Boz Rutan, Ken Shamrock, another Frank. Okay. Gosh. Okay, now I feel bad. I should have heard of this guy. He fought a lot of the OG like UFC middleweight, light heavyweight guys. Okay, nice. Yeah. I'll have to hopefully there some of these fights are on like the Fight Pass and Craze library. If not, then on YouTube. Very nice. I'll have to check it out. Okay, flag bans gone. Would love to see fighters from underrepresented countries like Jubilee bring the Indian flag and Jekka bring the Indonesian flag. Totally. And then yeah, should check him out. Suzuki. He did what the mocap for King. Okay, nice. Yeah, I played Tekken growing up. Minoru Suzuki, watched him a couple times in AEW. Oh, okay. I think he retired a year ago. A year ago? Guy's 55. Loved his work in pro wrestling. Yeah, that's fun. Nice. All right, guys. Well, appreciate all of your comments. Dropped my phone here. I was just going to see if we've had any exciting updates. I was just going to see if we had any exciting updates on the USADA front. So Conor McGregor will undergo 6 months of drug testing before he's cleared to fight again with that date around April 8th, 2024. Hunter Campbell, this is Damon Martin of MMA Fighting is tweeting this. Hunter Campbell emphasized there was never any attempt by the UFC or Conor to reduce the 6 months of testing required. That is the question right now. Did the UFC ever put pressure on USADA to make special exemptions for Conor McGregor? Because USADA is saying that is what gave friction to their relationship and made it, quote, untenable. I would love to know if there are any receipts from that from USADA. Oscar Willis tweeted this. Hunter Campbell says the UFC is at least open to the idea of athletes taking substances to recover from devastating injuries based off the science and long-term performance-enhancing benefits over the coming years. Okay, so another element of the Conor McGregor situation, which this is purely my conjecture. We have no evidence of this, but the rumor is that the reason why it's taken Conor McGregor so long to come back, why he has not entered the USADA testing pool, is because he has been using, he's a wealthy guy. He can afford the best that money can buy, including medical care. He's coming back from this devastating injury against Dustin Poirier, and some of the methods that he's using to have the best possible recovery would have been flagged by USADA. So he's been, getting that out of the system. So that's the rumor. It's the rumor. Don't know if that's true. But based on especially Hunter Campbell saying that, it sounds like that is a big point of contention between the UFC and USADA, it's kind of throwing out the baby with the bathwater in terms of recovering from devastating injuries. Obviously, you could see how different different substances that promote healing. And I mean, yeah, you go to the doctor with an injury, they'll give you a steroid, you know, as simple as that. So yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to, did USADA make an apology? Good question. Because yeah, it is 5:15 Pacific time. Let me see. I highly doubt it. Highly doubt it. I'm seeing nothing as I scroll through here. Jeez. It is a PR, acrobatics of PR is what this all is. So interesting. All right, well, have fun catching up with all that. I know I am about to. We'll talk to you guys next week. Enjoy the fights this week. Enjoy UFC Vegas 81. Enjoy UAE Warriors. We will talk next week. I will have a short breakdown of Anshul Jubilee versus Mike Breeden. Did the research for that today. Really looking forward to that fight, even more now. So we'll talk next week. Look for that video. And until then, enjoy the fights.